Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The Trump transition has made 12 cabinet picks so far. But perhaps none has stirred a fiercer reaction on the left than the nominee for Secretary of State, longtime ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson. Attacked as a tool of big business, a pawn of Vladimir Putin, Tillerson is likely to have boisterous nomination hearings. Among the most upset are environmental groups who object to what Mr. Tillerson does for a living. For example, Fred Krupp, who's the longtime president of the Environmental Defense Fund, greeted the Tillerson news this way, quote, President-elect Trump's nomination of ExxonMobil CEO for Secretary of State is another sign that he is putting the interests of the oil and gas industry ahead of the interests of the American people. Well, Mr. Krupp joins us now. Fred, thanks for coming on.
Delighted to be here.
So I think of you as kind of a reasonable guy, an environmentalist, but sort of market-oriented, and that seemed like a kind of a knee-jerk response to the nomination of Rex Tillerson, maybe more aimed at your donors in West L.A. than at the rest of the country. You really think that Trump appointed him so he could increase the fortunes of the oil and gas business?
No, Tucker, I think we should take a step back from Mr. Tillerson. The question is the entire slate of nominees from the president-elect.
Well, this was Mr. Tillerson you were referring to, I think.
Yes, but he's part of a slate. I don't object to having a business voice in the cabinet. That makes a lot of sense. But when you look at the fact that it's Mr. Perry who railroaded through fast-track 13 permits to build coal-fired power plants in Texas, when you look at the fact that Scott Pruitt, head of EPA, has also sided with the oil and gas industry and tried to rip down every air pollution safeguard, that's the issue. It's a question of balance. This cabinet is way out of balance on these issues.
But with respect, this is what guests always do when they don't want to answer a direct question. They deflect it to something much larger. It's not really about it's about a larger question. I'm asking you to respond to a quote from you about Rex Tillerson saying, this is a sign that Trump is putting the interests of the oil and gas business ahead of those of America. And I'm just saying, it's a pretty heavy charge. Do you have any evidence for it?
Well, the evidence is when you look at the cabinet, there are three people that I just mentioned, all representing one point of view. Right. Good policy, Tucker, I believe, is when you have a diversity of views. Now, in terms of, I appreciate you mentioned that, the Environmental Defense Fund is market-oriented. We've worked with President Reagan and his cabinet. We've worked with President Bush, father and son. Just this past year, we passed a toxic safety bill, 403 votes to 12 in the House of Representatives. We don't have a knee-jerk response, but what we'd like to see is balance, and especially at the EPA, Mr. Pruitt is outside of the mainstream.
Okay, you don't like Mr. Pruitt, but I'm talking about, this is a Secretary of State, and what I found so dishonest about the statement is that you're actually not on a completely different page from Rex Tillerson. He's come out for a carbon tax. He was supportive of the Paris Agreement this spring. Those are positions that you have. Oh, you've lost audio. Can you hear me? Mr. Krupp? Unfortunately, he can't. We will come back to Fred Krupp. I think we're working on the audio right now. So the point is, look, if you can hear me, Mr. Krupp, that Rex Tillerson is not on the opposite side of you on these issues. The guy's for a carbon tax. He's been on the Democratic side of a bunch of climate issues, but you don't say that at all, nor do you point out that CO2 emittance in the United States have gone down relative to those in other industrialized countries, in part because of exploration done by ExxonMobil, which has made gas more affordable as opposed to coal for our electricity generation. So that's like a real point that you ignore because it's not serving your interest in fundraising.
No, actually, Tucker, we don't make judgments on the basis of fundraising. I'll tell you right now, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Tillerson has acknowledged that climate change is a real problem. And I appreciate the fact that he's voiced support for not only a carbon fee, but also the Paris Agreement. And I think it's good for America that the price of natural gas has gone down, thanks to exploration and innovation. I acknowledge all of that. It does concern me that Mr. Tillerson, as head of Exxon and part of the American Petroleum Institute, has been against safeguards to make sure that we don't waste natural gas by throwing it into the air. It does concern me that he's part of a slate of candidates that represents just one view, and getting back to my major concern about the selection and the nominee that we are opposing, Scott Pruitt. We're putting him in charge of an agency when he has built his career out of tearing down protections of the American public from clean air. The good neighbor rule is a rule designed to prevent bad air from wafting into states. It saves 34,000 lives a year. Mr. Pruitt has been against that. He's been against protections on mercury.
Well, to say that it saves 34,000 lives a year, I mean, look, we're getting into the realm of the speculative when you start saying things like that. I mean, I think you've got a point of view, and that's fine. Here's what makes honest dialogue impossible. When you and people like you use the term denier to describe people who are asking, in some cases, entirely legitimate questions about climate science. And isn't the essence of science that you form a hypothesis based on observation, and then you test and you retest that hypothesis? You are basically saying that people who ask questions should be shut down. And in fact, you've espoused using the power of government to crush those people in encouraging prosecutors
Doctor,
to
I don't think
Exxon.
That's fair. First of all, I haven't used the term denier in talking
your
to
group
you,
does.
so I don't
I was just
know.
on your web. I was just on the Environmental Defense Fund website, and you're calling people deniers who are, in some cases, asking totally reasonable questions. Isn't that
absolutely,
science?
Science is based on questioning, and we're for that.
Right.
And but forget it. Putting climate science to one side. The concern about Scott Pruitt is he's been out of the mainstream on American health protection.
But you are not answering my questions. You're instead diverting. Look, I know you have many concerns, and I do too, but I'm asking you a specific question about the use of the term denier, which is in fact, in its use, anti-science. People who are committed to the scientific method would never use the term denier. That's the kind of language that religious people use. You have a catechism, you're defending against all comers. Science is welcoming and open-minded. So will you pledge now to stop using that word and to ask your employees to do the same?
I understand your point on denier. I will say this, that the science on climate is clear that we do have an Earth that's warming because of human-caused pollution. And so whether you use the term denier or skeptic, I understand you have a preference for one and maybe not the other. The point is it's legitimate to question all the projections in the models, but the basic truth is the Earth is in a lot of trouble, and so are we, and that science is settled by the vast
then let me ask
majority
you,
of
since you believe the science is settled, if we can agree that the Earth appears to be warming, to what extent is that the result of human activity, and to what extent is it the result of natural cycles over which we have no control?
Tucker, there's
since
no
the
question.
Science is settled.
There is no question that natural cycles play a part. There is no question.
How big a part? Since the science is settled, you would know the proportion. How big a part?
Of the incremental warming we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, less than 10%.
What's the number, would you say?
The models tease this out. So human-caused warming is the overwhelming cause.
So it's less than 10%. What's the number? Since you do this for a living and you're familiar with the science, I just want to hold you to it, if I could.
Yeah, I can't give you the percentage off the top of my head, Tucker, but it is a minor component.
It's a minor component. All right. And my last question to you is, if I questioned that and I said, well, look, I'm not denying all of climate science, but a lot of the models have been wrong, as you know, over the past 60 years. They have been. And you would concede that. Maybe it's 50%. Would you call me a denier or a skeptic, or would you say, no, that's the kind of thing that people interested in science ought to be asking?
Tucker, I want to get our scientists together with people that you want to have debate this, and let's have a conversation.
I'm asking you as someone who represents settled science. What's the answer?
I welcome the questioning. I think when you look at the evidence, you'll come to the same conclusion I have.
All right. Fred, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Sorry about the audio. Well, once again, there were many high-profile guests inside Trump Tower today. Tech industry moguls sat down with the president-elect. Fox senior national correspondent John Roberts is live outside Trump Tower with an update. Hey, John.
Tucker, good evening to you. This was about the highest profile summit that Donald Trump has had since the election, probably the highest dollar as well, gathering together here on the 26th floor. High-tech billionaires, a lot of whom, by the way, had actively campaigned against him. People like Tim Cook from Apple, who raised millions of dollars for Hillary Clinton. People like Jeff Bezos from Amazon, who said that Trump had been eroding democracy during the campaign. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, as well as Elon Musk from Tesla and SpaceX, all of whom were Hillary Clinton supporters. Trump basically saying, look, the election is over. Let's move forward. We're going through this transition process. It's everybody get on the same page and pull together for jobs in the economy. You know, these companies have a lot at stake with the Trump presidency because a lot of them have got have billions of dollars parked overseas. They'd probably like to bring that back to the United States. Donald Trump is promising them that they can repatriate it under a Trump presidency at a lower tax rate than they would under an Obama administration, also promising to lower the corporate tax rate to 15%, and also today saying, hey, by the way, your stocks have been doing pretty well since the election. Listen to what Trump said.
You're doing well right now, and I'm very honored by the bounce. They're all talking about the bounce, so right now everybody in the zone has to like me at least a little bit, but we're going to try and have that bounce continue. And perhaps even more importantly, we want you to keep going with the incredible innovation.
Now, last night we told you that Montana Congressman Ryan Zinke is going to be named as Interior Secretary, which leaves two cabinet posts left, Agriculture and Veterans Affairs. For Agriculture, Donald Trump really wants North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp. She's a Democrat. Would like to have her in the cabinet. However, because of the fact that if she leaves to become a member of his cabinet, it's likely that a Republican would replace her, upping the balance of power in the Senate. Democrats really are kind of twisting her arm at the state level and the federal level and say, hey, don't do it. Resist the temptation to go into the cabinet. So the backup would be South Dakota Congresswoman Kristi Noem. But she has also said that she doesn't really want the job. She'd like to remain in Congress. I think she's probably got her sights on one day running for governor in South Dakota. But it's likely, Tucker, that if she were offered the job, if the president-elect comes calling, it would be difficult to say no. One of the most difficult positions they're having to fill is Veterans Affairs. It's going to require a very strong manager who can basically restructure the way that the bureaucracy operates, change the entire culture at VA, and right now they're having problems finding exactly the right candidate. So it could be days, if not a couple of weeks, before we hear who is going to fill those two positions. It's kind of coming down to the last strokes here, and it's proving that two of those positions that they got at the end here are probably the most difficult to fill. Tucker?
Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate it. Well, first it was Brexit. Now there's Cal-Exit. A group in California is working to secede from the Union. It's not going to fall off in the ocean. It's just going to become its own country. This is all spurred, of course, by the election of Donald Trump. The state wants a vote in the next 2 to 3 years to plan to kick off the effort with a ballot initiative. Joining us now is Marcus Ruiz-Evans. He's Vice President of Yes California, the group behind the secession movement. Marcus, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tucker. I really appreciate the opportunity to come out here and speak to all your audience.
Oh, of course. I'm from California, and I'm interested in what's going on there. So the last time a state tried this, I think, was April of 1861, when South Carolina made a secession move, and it didn't end well. Is it going to end better for California, do you think?
Yeah, because we're fundamentally trying for secession from America for fundamentally different reasons than the Confederacy did. And we're pursuing a very different legal mechanism. Just off the top, the South did not want to have a good partnership with the North, and they were against equal rights for minorities. Yes, California is saying that California is the most diverse place in the world, and that we want to have more minorities, more immigrants, more international connection, and essentially reject the values espoused by the Confederacy and whatever states formed it. Additionally, they tried to do violent unilateral secession. And when we look at Texas versus White, which is the only federal Supreme Court case ever in America's history to look at secession, they said, you can't do that, but you can, and this is the literal phrase in that court case that you won't see repeated in the news for whatever reason, I'm sure it's an accident, is that states literally can leave through consent to the states. So the phrase consent to the states is in there.
I think that's all true. I guess in reading your materials, you say that basically it's an ideological move. This is accelerated since the election of Trump. California did not vote for Trump. That's an understatement. And you guys want to move out and make it a kind of liberal utopia. Immigration is one of the issues that you mentioned. Would you open the border, your southern border with Mexico, wide and let all of Central America, to the extent it already hasn't, move to California? Would you have any closed border at all, and if so, why?
Every nation has to have borders and border controls and a functioning border. Yes, California wants a more open immigration system and a working immigration system. And the fact is that when we're talking about border controls, who's in charge of immigration? Who's in charge of the visas? Who's in charge of the border? Who has always been in charge of those things? The federal government. And they've totally failed. The fact is that the federal government hasn't done comprehensive...
No, that's true. It hasn't. But California does encourage people to come by issuing, for example, driver's license for illegal immigrants, among other things. But one of the results of massive immigration into California is, when I was growing up, it was the richest state, and now it has more poverty than any state. Almost a third of the state is in poverty. LA is the poorest big city in America. If you were to let millions and millions more of low-skilled laborers come into the state, how would it get richer?
Right. So the poverty is not because of the undocumented immigrants. It's because we lose $16 to $32 billion a year. It's because Silicon Valley is one of the major economic drivers of California. It loses about $3 billion a year because America's foreign image is so horrible that foreign countries will not buy technology products from California, so we lose money. Additionally, our trade
It's because
deals,
your middle
which
class moved
California
to
needs,
Denver.
are held up by about 10 years. So it's the federal government impeding California from making money in the billions of dollars that actually allows us to be impoverished and not keep people employed.
Okay. I mean, I don't love the federal government either, but that does seem like blaming the Russians for the election results. Maybe a little bit of denial. Let me ask you about this.
I saw the interview with you and the guy who called you a Russian spy. Now you know what it's like. They can just accuse you of anything.
Yes, they can. So California has 11, I think it's 11 military bases. Would you keep those, and would California have nuclear weapons as its own country?
So, yes, California has been very specific to say that we're only going to do 4 things. If you believe that California would be better off as a nation, not perfect, but better off, great. If you believe that we can only use legal mechanisms to get there, peaceful mechanisms to raise the argument, and that California is about diversity and there's no room to argue for that, against that, then you're in. We don't really take policy stances on a bunch of other things, so we haven't taken a stance on those issues. What we said is that it would be negotiated between elected officials in California and officials in the American government.
As one of the driving forces behind this, and as someone who's not, speaking for myself, going to move back to California under any circumstances, should I have something to worry about? Are you going to be a nuclear-armed left-wing power like Maduro's Venezuela, for example, but with nuclear weapons?
So I will answer the question. I absolutely believe in not deflecting. I get it. But yes, California has not taken a stance, and we're not going to, because we only ask people for 4 things. But in my opinion, obviously, you look at the history of California, and you can see where the characters are. California does not like nuclear war. It doesn't like nuclear anything. So likely that may be gone. It's also the #1 place for foreign direct investment, tourism, international students, and trade. So we don't think it's actually a target for being invaded. It doesn't go around telling countries what it can do, bossing them around, invading them, and disrupting their democracies.
You've got an international border. I mean, why wouldn't California become satellite parking for Tijuana in about 20 minutes if it didn't have means to defend itself? I mean, the only reason it doesn't happen now is because the federal government's protecting it, let's be honest.
Well, there's a difference between border control and military. And we would always have the border. The California Highway Patrol provides a second line of border deterrence a few miles north of the Mexico-California border, and we would continue to use the existing infrastructure that California has and make it more robust through better partnership with Mexico. We would not open the floodgates and let everybody from Latin America in. That's economically stupid. Our movement has been about good economics and growing the California economy.
You already did. I'm sorry. I wish we had more time.
Actually, we didn't.
Oh, I was just back home the other day. I think you did. But Marcus, we can debate it when we're back in the Golden State. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just the federal government runs the border, so we don't actually have the ability to open the gates. Only they do.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it hasn't improved California. Thanks a lot, Marcus. Great to see you.
That's a fact.
And now it's time for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. Tonight, singer John Legend is back for another round of political pronouncements. He can't stop. And this time, Kanye West is caught in the eye of the storm. Legend said in an interview that he was disappointed with West for saying he would vote for Donald Trump, and he slammed the rapper's meeting with the president-elect as a, quote, publicity stunt. Twitter had a lot to say about this. First up, that guy, that's how he identifies himself, I thought everyone knew it was a publicity stunt. Was there a person in La La Land who didn't have a clue, or was it 2? If more than 2, sad. JW tweeted this: everything Kanye West does is a publicity stunt. True. Andrew Sigerson said, quote, because we should never talk to people we disagree with. Yes. A man called Fu tweeted this: being open-minded and listening to others is very important. John, building walls? And finally, Anthony G said, would you say the same thing if he was doing it with Hillary? Ooh, great question. That's tonight's Twitter storm. Up next, upset about Hillary Clinton's loss? Cut off your hair in mourning. One woman did just that. We're going to talk to her next. Also, dark mutterings in Washington about Russian interference in the November election. Secret agents in Wisconsin, voting machines programmed by Vladimir Putin himself? Maybe. We'll talk to the member of Congress who's trying to mount an independent investigation into all of that. That's coming up. Well, in the week since Donald Trump's election, we've seen a lot of sadness on the left. According to New York Magazine, the in-house newsletter of well-heeled liberals in Manhattan and Brooklyn, women across the country, or at least in the 5 boroughs, are, quote, making their own statements of rebellion by challenging traditional notions of beauty. Well, Christian Henderson is a professor at George Washington University here in D.C. When she heard the news of Trump's victory, she's one of those who headed directly to the hair salon with revenge in mind, and she joins us now. It is great to see you.
Thank you.
By the way, I should concede, in the interest of accuracy, I cut my hair too after Trump was elected.
I know, I found that out.
But it was by force. I had no choice. So tell us the political statement that you believe your hair is sending.
So have you ever been fearful before? What's your biggest fear?
Well, I don't know. Getting fired again?
Right.
Okay.
So we all have different fears, right? And so regardless of your political leaning or your race or your gender, we all have fear. And I really think that this election was rooted in fear for a lot of people. So whether you're fearful of being judgment, or if you're fearful of poverty, or if you're fearful that someone's going to judge you because of your gender, a lot of people voted out of fear in this election. So for me, my hair was a symbolism of me living fearlessly. For so long, I was nervous to wear my hair the way that it naturally grew out of my head, because I wasn't sure if I was going to fit into mainstream America, or I wasn't a part of the Eurocentric views of beauty. So I kept
There's
my
the
hair.
before and after shot.
So I kept my hair the way that I thought would fit into society. So for me, this was not about Trump or some political statement. This was me saying, I'm no longer going to live in fear, and I want the rest of us to also
So
no
you're
longer
wearing
live
your
in
hair
fear.
the way you want to wear it now.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that makes a ton of sense. Now, and I'm for that, by the way. I'm not allowed to do it, but I'm not against it. So let me ask you this. In the piece, in the New York Magazine piece in which you were quoted, there were women there saying, well, I shaved my hair off. I got a crew cut. As really an expression of rage.
Right.
Toward this. Should your appearance be used as a political instrument? And, like, where would you stop? I mean, would you get a tattoo?
Right.
Would you get a nose piercing? Would you get plastic surgery? Like, is this a good way to protest politics?
I mean, I think it's a hard thing for me to tell someone else what's a good way for them to protest politics or not. I do think it's really important for women to feel comfortable adjusting their look in whatever way that they deem fit, particularly if you have been wearing your hair or your makeup in a certain way because of the way society has told you that you need to live.
Right.
So I'm all for people living free and doing whatever feels right in their soul and not having it connected to politics per se.
Right. Okay. So, but it does seem like maybe there's an irony trapped at the center of this, because if you don't like Trump and you don't like Trump, fine. But in some sense, you're giving him control of your hair.
Right. No.
I mean, right? So you're actually empowering someone you don't like.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's about liking or disliking or empowering Trump, because for me, this had nothing to do with Trump. And I know it might be difficult for me to tell you that something I changed in my look had nothing to do with the man, but it really did. It had nothing to do with Trump. It was about me and me not wanting to live in fear anymore. And I think a lot of these women, that's what it was about, is them saying, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to do something about me, and I'm going to enter the world in a fearless place so that way I can be a better person and help bring us together as a country.
So what's your next move in fearlessness in your appearance?
I'm in the process of building a platform to help other women live fearless as well. So I write a blog, and I do talks, and I do speeches, and I come on shows like this, and I just empower people to be fearless and to start to have conversations across the aisle and recognize that we have to show up from day to day and not be pulled in different directions.
But wait a second. I mean, if I were going to go like fully fearless, and the concept is appealing, obviously, but like I probably wouldn't take a shower, you know what I mean? Or like comb my hair. I certainly wouldn't be wearing a necktie.
Then take your tie off.
Maybe that's just gross,
No,
actually.
go
Maybe it's not fearless. Maybe it's just kind of nasty.
I mean, I don't think cutting your hair, now taking a shower is definitely gross. I would not encourage you to do that, but take off the tie. There are no one's in here watching. Go ahead if you want to take it off.
I don't know if I'm going to be signing up for your class anytime soon, but I appreciate your coming on to explain that.
No problem.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Congress wants an investigation into Russian meddling in the election. There's no bigger story in Washington right now than the question of Russian interference with the presidential election. People are calling for investigations, making allegations. But according to a new poll by Fox News, voters are less interested. A new poll that we put out asked registered voters what they thought of Russia's attempts, whether they helped sway the outcome. 32% said Donald Trump benefited. Just 1% said Hillary Clinton. 59%, meanwhile, said it didn't have any effect at all. Joining us now is one of the first in Congress to demand an investigation of all this, California Congressman Eric Swalwell. Congressman, thanks all for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker, for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I know that you're abroad right now, so you may have missed it. But at the White House briefing today, Josh Earnest said something I thought pretty striking. He said this of Trump. He said Trump was obviously aware and concluded, based on whatever facts and sources he had available to him, that Russia was involved in swaying the election. That's pretty close to charging Trump with colluding with Russian intelligence. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Trump had an early heads up about this and was colluding with the Russians?
We don't know enough right now, Tucker, and that's why I'm calling for an independent commission. You know, when the president-elect is disavowing what 17 intelligence agencies have said, that Russia was responsible for the hacking, and what the CIA apparently is now leaking out, that they had a preferred candidate in Donald Trump, I think the best way to take the politics out of this is to have an independent commission, have them look at who was responsible, how we were so vulnerable, and then most importantly, because I don't think we need to relitigate the last election, look forward at what we can do to make sure this never happens to our democracy again.
Right. That's not quite right, though, Congressman, because really the key info dump in the election was the hacking of John Podesta's, Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's Gmail account. And there's no consensus on that, how that happened. 17 intelligence agencies are not saying that the Russians were behind that. They're saying, in fact, it was done with a very simple phishing hack that you or I could have done. And so it's not really that clear. And of course, the director of national intelligence, Clapper, has not weighed in on this definitively either way. So it's not actually a settled question in the way that you're presenting it, is it?
Well, no, Tucker, actually, DNI Clapper has said that that the hacking that did occur against the DNC, the DCCC, the Podesta emails came from the Russian government. I have seen also, in my oversight role as the CIA senior Democrat, this evidence. It's overwhelming, and Donald Trump should first start taking his intelligence briefings. He's taken fewer than anyone that has been the president-elect before him. And two, he should, I think, have faith in the intelligence community and want an independent commission.
Well, then why is there, if it's settled, as you're saying it is, then why is the FBI apparently saying that there is no consensus on why this was done?
I don't want to speak for the FBI. The leaks that I have seen come out is that apparently there is a question as to whether the Russians had a preferred candidate. But I think if you look at the overwhelming evidence that was dumped through WikiLeaks, through Guccifer 2.0, it was to benefit Donald Trump. But that's something we should look at. And I don't want to prejudge the results of an investigation.
Well, you're
that's
obviously,
why I think it's
prejudging them now because you left open the possibility
Tucker, the way I look at it,
let me just finish.
Sure, go ahead.
That Trump was somehow colluding with foreign agents, which was a pretty strong thing to say. But in the piece you wrote yesterday for The Hill, you said we need a 12-member bipartisan group that would interview witnesses, obtain documents, issue subpoenas. Who would subpoenas be issued to?
Sure. I think subpoenas would be issued to anyone in the intelligence community who had access to the information they were looking at to support the hack. And Tucker, the way I look at this, I was a prosecutor for 7 years. And in any case that you're prosecuting, you move forward when you have what's called probable cause. So right now, we at least have enough evidence that the Russian government was involved. But I think to have a final independent sign-off, especially when the president-elect is undermining the findings of the intelligence community, it would serve us all if we had an independent commission to say once and for all who did this, how they did this, and make recommendations so it never happens again. You
know, I've lived here a long time, long enough to believe that it's entirely within bounds and patriotic to question the findings of the so-called intelligence community, which is not much of a community, as you know, since you're on the committee. It's a bunch of different agencies, often at war with each other, often reaching contradictory conclusions and sometimes wrong conclusions. So why is it prima facie out of bounds to say, well, hold on a second, show me the evidence, tell me more, et cetera? Or maybe I don't buy what you say. You're not allowed to say that now? We all have to sort of go along with whatever they say in a bovine manner? I mean, what is this anyway?
You should be allowed to say that if you are saying it from a perspective of being informed. And there's no evidence right now that Donald Trump has even taken the briefing on the evidence that Russia was behind
well, I haven't
hacking.
taken the briefing either, and I have all kinds of questions about it. And I actually don't believe I mean, I think there's quite a bit of subjective analysis in here. But let me ask you a question I've asked every night for the last week, which is, if this, I have no doubt the Russians want to influence our election and everyone else's election and have all kinds of ill motives. I'm not a Russia guy. I'm not a fan. However, I don't see any evidence that whatever they did or didn't do had a material effect on the outcome of the election. And if you know otherwise, tell me what specific piece of information that they got into WikiLeaks moved enough votes to make Hillary Clinton the loser and Trump the winner.
And Tucker, this is why I am not trying to relitigate what happened. What I believe is whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you should not tolerate a foreign government trying to influence the election. Whether they did or they did not, they certainly, the evidence shows right now, that they tried to. And this, the victims may have been the Democrats this time.
Okay, but I get it. It could be the Republicans next time, and I'm against hacking. But we know that the Russians have been breaking into government computers literally for years, including the White House. The White House computer system, as you know, you're on the committee, was shut down for weeks over this. And I don't remember any kind of independent blue ribbon commission issuing subpoenas to the Obama people to ask why they allowed that to happen. Right? So basically you're alleging that it had a material effect. But if it didn't have an effect, then who cares?
Well, this is a presidential election that I certainly believe that when you are dumping on a major party's candidate, you are trying to influence the outcome of the election. And we should stand up, Republicans and Democrats, and say, we don't tolerate that. These are our fights.
Yeah, I guess I just would want to see any evidence that it had an effect. I mean, you could say, well, the Russians, want America's military to disarm. Okay, I'm sure they do. But until they get us to do that, it's not a problem. I mean, you haven't demonstrated that they actually had an ill effect on our country, have you?
Well, Tucker, I think you're proving my point, which is an independent commission should look at this to look at and answer all of your questions.
Okay. Well, maybe it will. And I hope it does. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Tucker.
Well, the Iranian embassy in Washington, D.C. has languished an empty husk for decades, but guess who's paying to maintain it? Well, if you guessed you're right. We'll investigate that next. Plus, if you were king for a day and had absolute power to do anything, obviously you would misuse that power. But what would you do to improve our country? You've been sending us lots of answers, and they're really smart. Stay tuned for that. Well, here's something new. Santa apparently has quit smoking. At least that's what Michelle Obama told a group of kids at a Washington, D.C. children's hospital this week. The First Lady was joined by Ryan Seacrest for some reason for a reading of The Night Before Christmas when she decided the classic poem did not meet her high moral standards. Watch this.
And the beard on his chin was as white as the snow.
The stump of a pipe. I think St. Nick gave up smoking. This was a long time back.
That's actually false. St. Nick is a middle-aged man, a taxpayer. He can still smoke if he feels like it. This is America. Just to get that clear. Well, did you know that your money could be used to be maintaining the old Iranian embassy on Massachusetts Avenue right in the middle of D.C.? The building hasn't been used in nearly 4 decades since the hostages were grabbed in 1979. We sent correspondent Kristen Fisher out there to investigate, and she's here to tell us now what she found. Kristen, what's it like?
Well, Tucker, first of all, I became interested in this building because I drove past it all the time, as I know you did too.
Yes,
and
I
it's
do.
This big, beautiful structure right in the middle of D.C.'s famed Embassy Row, but it's been vacant for the last 36 years, ever since diplomatic relations with Iran were severed after the hostage crisis of 1979. Now, both countries continue to be legally bound by the Vienna Convention to protect each other's diplomatic property against damage or impairment of its dignity. But Iran clearly violated that treaty back in 1979, and since then, the former U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been turned into the Den of Spies Museum, complete with anti-American graffiti and statues, as you can see there. It was also used at one point as a training center for the Revolutionary Guard. But here in Washington, the U.S. government continues to protect and maintain the former embassy of Iran. In fact, a few years ago, the State Department, under the Obama administration, refurbished it and repaired the building's signature blue dome. So I went out there today to ask people what they thought. Should the U.S. continue to respect and protect the old embassy of the current leading state sponsor of terrorism? Do y'all know what this building is behind you?
No idea. No idea.
It is the former embassy of Iran.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it has been abandoned for the last 30 plus years.
Wow, okay. I live right up the road and I've never known that.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's been abandoned, but I know that it's empty. It's empty.
Right.
Right. It doesn't bother me when you see a building that's been let go and not used. Yes.
Do you think that we should be making these kinds of repairs, investing this time and money on this building?
I mean, it seems kind of pointless if it's just sitting there, just resting.
If they're going to maintain it, perhaps they could rent it and at least use it.
I mean, I guess it doesn't seem quite fair that we're doing all this work and they're not doing the same for us.
What would you like this building to be turned into?
I mean, as an avid sports lover and a guy from Texas, you know, basketball is pretty big.
Like a Tex-Mex restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't have that here in Washington, D.C.
If they gave us the building, we'll get a good Tex-Mex restaurant going.
And there's even, I believe, another embassy that I've seen that's even worse shape. And it's an eyesore.
Pakistan, you think?
I think it's Pakistan.
We're going to have to go check that out. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering where all of the money comes from to maintain and refurbish the former Iranian embassy. Well, according to an article on the State Department's website, I want to read it to you. This embassy is one of 11 properties owned by the Iranian government across the United States, all of which are now in U.S. government custody. Some of Iran's properties stand empty, others are rented. Rental income from the properties helps pay for the maintenance of others. So, helps pay is really the key word there. We don't know if that covers all of the costs to maintain these buildings, but it's certainly possible that your tax dollars help foot the bill. And Tucker, what I want to know is what would you turn it into if that whole
you know what?
Vienna
I would
Convention
honestly,
wasn't there?
I would turn it into the Museum of Feminism. And I'm not for that, or rent it to the pork producers or something, but I think I would make it the Museum of Feminism, just to make a point. And I'm not for a Museum of Feminism under normal circumstances.
All right. Or an Iranian cultural center, perhaps?
I would. Maybe,
Somebody said a basketball court.
You're
so.
a nicer person, so maybe that's it. And there are a ton of nice Persians. I know.
I don't know if I'm that nice.
You're very nice. Kristen Fisher, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, could the new Donald Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue right here in D.C. hurt his plans to inhabit another famous Pennsylvania Avenue building? Ed Henry joins us in just a second with the answer to that question. Time now for the after-dinner mint we call the Friend Zone, where we bring our friends from within the building here at Fox on to the set. And tonight, one of our favorites, Ed Henry, we have a question for him. Okay, the president-elect, Donald Trump, he's got a new hotel here in Washington, and it could be a problem once he's in office. House Democrats say the General Services Administration told them Mr. Trump must fully divest from that property or will be in violation of the lease. Is that true?
That part is true. There's obviously a bigger question about what he should do in terms of conflict of interest. The reason why this part narrowly is true is that remember that Donald Trump got the lease from the government. This is the old post office in Washington, very historic building. Been run down, become like a food court, basically. Yeah. And it was ridiculous. And he's turned it into a beautiful hotel. You see those pictures. But the lease with the General Services Administration says that no government official can oversee this property, can own this hotel, because this was before he was a presidential candidate, number one. And number two, they figured they wanted to make sure that President Obama or now President Trump didn't pick some son-in-law or uncle or something to own the hotel through a government contract. You know, make sure there's no nepotism. That's a reasonable thing to do. Now you have this odd position where someone who's a businessman for the first time has become president, and someone who has a hotel just blocks from the White House. And it's obviously odd because the commander-in-chief, owns a hotel. Yeah. The lease is held by the government that he oversees. If they want to renegotiate any of the terms, he's the boss. He helps control their, the GSA's budget. So I think, look, in all likelihood, what's going to happen is that Donald Trump, as president, will have to get off the lease, technically, and sell that property to one or both of, Donald Jr. and Eric. My broader point is, this is going to be part of whatever he does with his news conference that was supposed to happen this week. Does he divest completely? Does he get his kids more involved? These are going to be big questions moving forward.
Interesting. So I walked by your office the other night, and it was really, really late. And you're sitting in there hunting and pecking. You do type with two fingers, I noticed. And I said, Ed, what are you doing? You banging out a script? You said, no, I'm finishing up a book. I didn't even know you're writing it. What is it?
Book on Jackie Robinson. It's coming out on April 4th, time to the beginning of the baseball season, and to the 70th anniversary of Jackie's first game, April 15th. You see his picture there. He's a hero of mine. My son happens to have the same birthday, April 15th, Patrick. And so it's a nice coincidence because I was at a dinner party in Washington in 2008. I'll spare you all the details, but it was one of the worst parties. It was a Belgian ambassador.
I think I may have been there.
You might have been there, right? And there's 42 Faith, because it's about Jackie Robinson's faith in God, because I was at this dinner party. You know these parties that go on and on? The Belgian ambassador threw it, and he served pigeon okay, is a delicacy in Belgium. You have to read the book to get what else happened there. Okay,
Give me the French
but I'm
fries,
sitting
man.
next to
Spare me the pigeon.
Sitting next to a woman who said, I tried to leave early. I said I wanted to go watch a baseball game. And she said, oh, you're a baseball fan? My late father-in-law had a major role in baseball history. I sat back down. She said the story's never been told. Long story short is that her late father-in-law was a minister in Brooklyn who in 1945 had Branch Rickey knock on the door and basically say he wasn't sure if he could go through with signing Jackie Robinson to the first contract. He obviously went through with it. But why did he go see a minister was my question. And what did the minister say? And I was able to track all of this down. It's in the book. And then it led me to look at...
Did she help you with the book, this woman you met?
She did, Donna Shore. And I give her great credit in the book. And the minister told his wife before he died that this secret meeting had happened in a church in Brooklyn. And the minister's wife told it in the 1960s at the church in Brooklyn, put it in the bulletin because she wanted Jackie Robinson to know that Branch Rickey sought a higher power, that he reached beyond himself to get the first African-American to play. I thought it was really profound. And I wanted to know, since she revealed this in a church bulletin in the 1960s, did Jackie Robinson, who sadly died so early in 1972, did he know about this before he died? So I go on a journey, and I start with Carl Erskine, one of the only surviving members of Brooklyn Dodgers, almost 90 years old, at an IHOP in Indiana. And I end with Rachel Robinson in her office in New York, the widow of Jackie Robinson. She's still alive, almost 95 years old. And she answers the question about whether Jackie knew.
That is great. You've totally
Did I sell it? I just sort of did that on the fly.
I'm serious, actually. That sounds like a great book. And it sounds like it took a lot of legwork, which I admire.
It did. It's going to be fun.
Good for you.
I love baseball. I'm passionate about it. And so it's 42 Faith, the rest of the Jackie Robinson story. Because everyone told me, I already saw the movie. There's nothing new. There's new stuff in there.
Done. Pre-order tonight.
Good.
Ed, thank you.
Appreciate
Great to see you, man. Coming up, you're almost out of time to tell us what you would do if you were king for a day. Tweet us at Tucker Carlson or email Tucker Carlson tonight, foxnews.com. We're back in just a minute. And now, one of my favorites, king for a day. If you had absolute power and could do one thing to improve America, what would you do? Tolmaz tweeted this: keep the Kardashians out of Trump Tower. Too late. Kathy Salazar said, track down whoever started the PC lunacy that has overtaken America and poke them with a safety pin. The safety pin of truth, I hope. George emailed this: if I were king for a day, I would, number one, change voting to April 16th, and number two, eliminate withholding tax so every employee feels it. I love that. Alan Griffiths said this: I would require all federal employees to count off by twos. I would then summarily fire all number twos. Probably not notice it. And finally, Karen wrote this: remove all jelly filled in every box of assorted candy, replacing them with solid milk chocolate. You're welcome. Actually, I disagree with you, Karen, but I enjoy the thought. Today in Pomposities, tomorrow, send us the most pompous thing you've heard. Bill O'Reilly next. Have a great night.